Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's presentation using Jira data to build a more reliable project roadmap. Thank you for attending. We have a number of folks from Europe, so good afternoon, and a number of folks from the US, so good morning. And we'll take about 50 to 55 minutes today with saving time for questions at the end. So this is the agenda for today. It's pretty straightforward. We have this introduction. We'll have a presentation and demonstration from Jeremy Stark. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have Q&A at the end. There's a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to go over before we begin. First of all attending microphones are muted. We have a large group today, and that makes it possible for us to go through the presentation without the background noises of sirens and barking dogs and so forth. But we encourage questions. There is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'd encourage you to write down your questions as we go. We will answer them at the end. We'll save them until the end of the presentation. I will read the questions to Jeremy so that he can answer them. Or if there are any general questions that are more applicable for me to answer, I'll do that. So write them down as we go. And we promise if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you via email, which is only possible if you don't ask the questions anonymously. So if you'd rather use the anonymous feature to ask a question, you'll see that when you open the Q&A panel. Feel free to do that, but that will mean that it'll be hard for us to follow up with you if we didn't get to your question today during the live session. The session is being recorded. A lot of people like to review the materials once again after the presentation is ended. So we'll make it available on our YouTube channel. You'll get an email if you registered for the event that will tell you where to find it. And feel free to watch it again, share it with your colleagues, whatever makes sense for you. So today's speaker is Jeremy Stark. He's the head of solutions at ALM Works. And he's the product owner for the product that we'll be discussing in today's presentation and the subject matter expert for this area of our product line. Prior to joining ALM Works, Jeremy was actually a customer of ours. He's been a longtime Structure user, as many of the people on the call today are as well. And he's also an Agile coach, certified Agile coach with lots of experience in this area. So Jeremy, you can take my word for it if you haven't met him yet. He's very knowledgeable in this area, and we're looking forward to hearing his remarks this morning. Jeremy, over to you.
Hi, welcome all, and thanks for joining. So the meat of this presentation is the demo of the product itself, but I just want to go through a few slides to sort of set the stage for how we're thinking about this product and how it fits into ALM Works product line. So structure.deliver is here. We launched it April 12th in the marketplace. It's a new portfolio level product from ALM Works. It's designed to complement structure and structure Gantt. And Deliver is sort of the opposite of Gantt in that Gantt is a tool for deep analysis of individual tickets, whereas Deliver is more of a bottom line, are we on target for this high level portfolio objective? It's currently available for on-prem versions of Jira, and DC certification Atlassian is actually reviewing our certification now, so we should get notice about the results of that shortly, and it'll be available on DC at that point. So if you're not familiar with Structure for Jira, just very briefly, Structure is a tool for aggregating your data in Jira into a unified view that provides a hierarchy of all of your tickets and issues. And once you have that hierarchy, you can then add columns in sort of like a spreadsheet format that do analysis on those individual items and roll-ups across the hierarchy and so forth. We also have a product called Structure Gantt, which takes that hierarchy and allows you to lay it out over time to create a typical Gantt timeline, showing dependencies, and a boatload of other features are available through that addition. So Deliver really looks at Structure as a data platform. And as Structure is managing really the most important data in your organization, Deliver looks at that data and turns it into bottom line assessments of how that project work is performing against the specific date you're trying to hit. And the visuals are very simplified and useful for example, like a weekly status meeting or a bi-weekly status meeting with leadership. So on one side, you've got Structure and Gantt, which is highly analytical. And on the other side, you've got now Deliver, which is really synthesizing the data that you're working with and producing these metrics and bottom line numbers about how you're performing against the targets that you've set. So the driving question that the driving question for Deliver really is in the work that I've done and in the work that ALM Works has done and our partners have done when we're solutioning with organizations. Really, the fundamental question that we hear leadership asking, and they ask this in many different ways, but it generally they all sort of fit under this moniker, which is leadership is just asking, when will I see value from my investment? We've made some investments. We have a plan. When are we going to see it? We're tracking towards the plan. Are we going to hit the date that we planned for? So Deliver, really all of Deliver's feature set is designed to answer this question as easily and quickly as possible. So you can get through a status meeting. You can answer leadership if they come, in the afternoon and need some sort of assessment about how the project is going. You can go to Deliver and get these answers very quickly, and they're backed by data, and there's a story around them ready to go. So when you're talking about portfolio management, you really have to have something to say within these three categories of planning, tracking, incorporating learning, because your teams are using an agile process. There's going to be some adaptation that's necessary. So adapting quickly and replanning if necessary, and then ultimately delivering according to the expectations that were set. So just walking through that quickly. Deliver, and this first item is just a bullet point, but really this is the core of Deliver. At the beginning of a project, we know we have the least amount of information for this project. We don't have all the tickets and scope in Jira. We don't understand the problem space as deeply as we will at the end of the project. And yet we're being asked to predict when we're likely to hit a target date. And so Deliver, again, all the tooling in Deliver is designed to help in this specific situation where you have a sparse data set of scope and you're being asked to provide a target date that's well outside of Agile's iterative cycles. So 2-3 months into the future, basically Deliver's operational unit is a quarter. So Deliver will help you plan out a quarter, 2 quarters, maybe up to 3 quarters worth of work, and then set target dates ahead of time and then track whether or not you're tracking towards those target dates. So the fundamental problem that we saw in organizations is that Agile's been out for really 20 years, and it's done a really good job of revitalizing engineering and focusing on the customer and focusing on quick, short iterations that prove the product again and again and again. What it hasn't been able to solve for really is that leadership still, and justifiably does, ask for lots of features over a longer timeline. And the problem is that starts to look like waterfall, and it really forces some bad practices on Agile teams when they're forced to answer that question through very data intensive processes, like laying out an entire Gantt for the whole project. So Deliver is really designed to fit between these two extremes and provide a bridge for the Agile teams to be able to answer leadership's request for a very large project at a certain date, while still preserving their ability to work in short iterative cycles, adapt and learn as they go, and still meet the expectations that were set. So, and Deliver is really about getting commitments early based on data and team level assessments of the work, and then set those expectations and then track towards them. And if you're not going to hit them, learn very early that something needs to be done and then take action. So tracking and deliver really is about maintaining those expectations. So maintaining focus on the minimal viable product or minimal marketable product, depending upon how you communicate about it. Projects, generally, there's scope creep. It's natural. Deliver is going to help you keep that scope creep in check so that your dates don't slip. Manage capacity and allocation priorities. So teams generally are working on several things simultaneously. They have multiple sources of priority, some of them official, some of them unofficial, but they all drain capacity from the team. And so Deliver is going to help you notice when a team isn't meeting its capacity allocations to a specific delivery you're trying to make, how that's impacting that delivery, and then you can go to the team or to leadership to make some adjustments potentially to their priorities, shut down sources of priority or reorganize their priority streams. Radiate status and measurement. So Deliver does have a new dashboard that provides some very high level information on the portfolio level projects that your organization is working on. And that's designed to work on a large screen monitor that can, be up in a work area and just be radiating the status of those items. It's also really designed to get you through the weekly or bi-weekly meeting you generally have with stakeholders and leadership about project status, provide some useful data, make some useful decisions, measure the effects of those decisions, and really just engage them in this process and make them feel that they can have an effect on the outcomes. It's all about driving decisions early. So notice signals in Deliver early. If you're going to miss a target date, if a specific team is slipping, go to that team soon and early, deliver help, and then measure the effects of that help. And then repeat this cycle until done. So it does come up that sometimes you learn something halfway through a project. It's going to take some replanning. You're going to have to add some scope, reassess. So Deliver is going to help you do this through really simulation and scenario building. If you need to add a half a dozen epics across a few teams, Deliver is going to help you understand the impact of that on your timelines by team, and then you make decisions about what scope seems achievable. If you need to move the target date, you get to do that early and talk to leadership early about the impacts there, and basically get everybody back on the same page in agreement, and then recommit to the new plan. And then finally, just delivering. Here, the key in Deliver is really to, yes, have your objective metrics. Deliver is going to provide those, which I say objective metrics get you about 50% of the way there. The other 50% is just listening to the teams talk about the work, because they have a lot of internal knowledge that really isn't quantifiable, but will have a huge impact on the timelines. And you want to incorporate that. And Deliver is going to allow you to look at the objective metrics and then influence them with the team assessments to come up with a date that really involves the team. And so it's easier to get their commitment. Deliver is going to focus on starting execution right away. So the Deliver works with sparse planning. And this is a key to Deliver, is that you can sparsely plan out a project. Deliver is going to fill in the gaps through predicted simulation. And then you can start with what you know right away. You don't need to spend a lot of time in planning, mapping everything out before you can provide a target date and before teams can get started right away on what they know, meaning let them be agile. Maintaining capacity focus of the team. So this is about priorities again. Deliver is is very concerned about where team priorities are going and whether they're focused on the right things. Maintaining scope is the other major axis here. So again, Deliver focuses on that in order to hit target dates, allows for learning and adapting, and is really focused on delivering on target, meeting expectations. And the last thing I'll throw in there is that Deliver's process agnostic. So let the teams be agile. Some teams work in Kanban, some in Scrum, some Scrumban, other sort of agile-ish processes. Deliver doesn't require that the teams work in any specific way. The metrics that Deliver looks at are lower level than story points or cycle times or things like that for the teams. So whatever the team process is, it'll produce a certain data trail in Jira, and Deliver latches onto that data trail and then gets predictive about how the teams will perform in the future. So you can use Scrum, Kanban, Lean, scaled agile frameworks. You can use waterfall. It's just going to produce a data trail, and Deliver is going to track that data trail. So I have 3 demo scenarios for the product setup. One, the first is we're going to replan an existing project. So I have a project with a bunch of data. It's a real project that I've anonymized all the data for. I was actually on that project about 3 or 4 years ago at this point. So I have some inside information on how that project went. We're going to go through a scenario where leadership shows up and has some new concerns, and we need to replan that project. Then we're going to go and plan a project from scratch to show how Deliver can take very sparse data and produce dates per team for a plan. And then we're going to look at how I've set up a portfolio level solution to do these demos. All right, I'm going to switch over to my demo now. All right, so we should all be looking at a structure at this point, which is probably familiar to most of you. Here, the structure is pulled in a bunch of tickets from several different teams that are working on a project at the portfolio level. This is called Business to Business Acme Inc., generic name. But we've got an Android team, a billing team, fulfillment team, an iOS team, and they've all contributed their epics to this project. The epics are broken down into stories using their Agile process, so they're grooming as they go. And then there are a few epics that don't have any stories associated with them. So this project is actually almost done. Still, it's still kind of hard to get a date out of this particular view. We have some information over here, the green bars for progress. We could add a couple columns to maybe refine this view a little bit, but let's just feed it to Deliver and see what we get in terms of dates. So when you install Deliver in your structure menu, down at the bottom, you get a new menu item called Deliver Dashboard. And we'll click on that. And here we have the Deliver Dashboard, which is a very simple view of the portfolio level projects that are being tracked by structures. So you've had your structure menu, and you can go in and select structures, and you can go search for structures and so forth. But there's some structures that really represent the core of the business. And this new dashboard is a place to separate those out from all the other structures that you're using and have a place where some data about those projects is being radiated. So for example, we have the name of the project. We have the target date that we've set. And then we have Deliver's calculated trending date for that project. We have the source structure that's feeding Deliver the data for this project. We have what we call a delivery lead. This is someone that you can go to if you have questions about this project. They might not be able to answer them directly, but they'll certainly be able to route you to someone who will. And then there's some various actions you can perform from this menu. But we're going to go in, and we're interested in the date. So we're going to go into this project and take a look at how Deliver assesses the data in that source structure. So there's 2 main components here. One is what we call a predictive cumulative flow diagram. So if you're not familiar with cumulative flow diagrams, maybe ask a question at the end, and I'll go into a little detail on how these things work. If you are familiar with cumulative flow diagrams, then just follow along. So this is a predictive cumulative flow diagram. So it has a marker for today. And to the left of this line is the history of the project. And we can see that we've been working on this project for quite a while, and we're basically almost done. We have a significant amount of tickets in the done column, and a very little amount of tickets actually in Jira in our backlog. But we'll notice at the today line, there's this big spike in to do. And what Deliver's doing is looking at the backlogs of all the teams, looking at the epics that they have in their backlog that are partially groomed epics, and realizing that there's probably more work that these teams are going to generate. And so how Deliver does that is it looks at the historical epic breakdown for each team. So for example, the canonical example that I use is you've got an iOS and an Android team, and the organization wants feature parity between these products. So the apps look the same on each of these phone systems. But when you give Android an epic, they'll think about the work and they'll break it down into maybe 5 or 6 big chunky stories, and the team will swarm these stories. But if you give that epic to the iOS team, they'll break it down into like 12 or 18 little tasky stories, and each engineer will take one of those stories and work on it. So they just think about work differently. And so when Deliver sees an epic for Android and sees an epic for iOS in the backlog, it'll predict different amounts of stories for these teams in the future and add them to the total scope that you're working against for this project. So this is the actual scope we have defined in Jira. This is the predicted scope across all the teams that Deliver is expecting to see at some future date and deliver, given the backlogs of these teams. And it creates a nice flat line for ending scope for this project. So Deliver is predicting we'll see about 320 stories at the end of this project. We're currently seeing right now about 260. But since we have this nice flat line, the other thing Deliver does is it comes up with throughput metrics for these teams, how these teams get work done, how often they get tickets into the done column. And it produces a simulation for these teams and runs these teams into the future. So now we switch to the right side of the today marker, and each of these teams will run their backlogs into the future until they run out of work for this project, at which point Deliver will put a pin on this graph when the team runs out of work. So this is the predicted finish date for billing is about 6 weeks from now. For Android, it's about 8 weeks. And for Fulfilment, it's way out to the right. They're predicted a few months out. So Fulfillment's our long pull team for this project. And our target date is around the time when Fulfillment is going to finish. So really, they're a risk team because they're hovering around the actual release date for this project. So if anything goes wrong, there isn't a lot of slack here for this team. So I would be very focused on this team if I was a delivery lead for this project. If we look to the right, we have some metrics for the teams that gives you some internal understanding by team of how these teams are committed to this project. So the first number is the throughput that the team is achieving against this specific project. So for example, Fulfillment's getting about 1 issue done per week. Android about 3.5 and billing about 2.5. We'll notice Web and iOS have dashes. That's because they've actually finished their work for this project and their pins are in the past to represent that. The next number is the remaining work that these teams have for this project. And we can see Fulfillment has 26 tickets left. But we can also see this predicted column where that's 15. So what Deliver is telling you is that there's 26 issues left, but 15 of them are part of Deliver's prediction. So they're not in Jira yet, but Deliver expects to see them given the epic backlog for this team. And it combines them with the actual work that is in Jira and comes up with the total remaining, which is actual plus predicted. And given the throughput and the actual plus predicted tickets, there's a trending date for this team. And it works the same for all the other teams. So from here, we can see, okay, we've got some risk probably with Fulfillment, but it looks like we're tracking towards the target date that we set. But leadership's been in a meeting all morning, and we know that they're going to come out with some sort of changes for this project. So in the afternoon, they show up and they say, yep, there's some changes. We need to know what the impact is, and we need to know how it's going to impact our date. So what we can do is take this project back into planning mode and use some of Deliver's tools to do some simulation given conversations with the teams. So let's go and do that now. So we'll go to Actions, and we'll move this delivery back into planning mode, which will open up the tools for doing planning with the team. So I have a list of high-level requirements from leadership. I've gathered all the teams into a room with their product owners, and we're just hashing through these requirements, and I'm trying to get some sense of what the impact is going to be on the scope for this project. So we talk to Fulfillment, and they say, well, we think it's probably about an epic's worth of work. We don't know exactly how to define the epic yet, but we know it's there. So what Deliver is going to let you do is simulate the addition of an epic to this project. So I'm going to go over to epics and I'm going to click, I'm going to add an epic and I'm going to save it. And what Deliver is going to do is put a little epic icon here with a +1, which means that Deliver is expecting to see another epic show up in the source structure, but it isn't there yet. It's going to add that expected epic to the predicted number of stories. So it's actually going to include the epic in its scope prediction, and it's going to up the total that it expects to see from the fulfillment team, which is going to up the total remaining stories, which is going to push them out further to the right. So immediately we see the impact of what adding that epic might be on fulfillment. And we know now that they're going to probably miss their target date unless we do something different. So, you know, we're still in the meeting and I can say, okay, well, since we're going to need that extra epic, is there any way we can get more throughput from you guys? And they might say, well, we've got 3 other sources of priority. So I will go to leadership and ask them, can we make some adjustments to the priority? And if they say yes, then I can say, well, maybe we can get another 1.5 tickets per week from fulfillment. They say, you know, if you deprioritize some of those priorities, we can give you more focus here. So go ahead and boost our priority. So now if we can get 2.5 tickets per week from them, we can probably get that extra epic done. And Deliver is going to tell you what those expectations now are. We expect to see an extra 1.5 tickets per week from fulfillment, and we expect to see an extra epic in the source structure. So we can go do this for all of the teams and plan out in simulation what the impact might be before we go commit to data in Jira. Just set up the expectations, get our dates, and go back to leadership even at the end of the day and just say, this is rough, but this is what it's looking like, so that they can start thinking about if they need to change the date and what kind of replanning will be necessary there. But let's just keep this simple, and just these 2 modifications that we've made, let's put this project back in development. Let's say that we're done with the replanning and see how it goes from here. So you'll notice that in planning, fulfillment is way to the left, and I want you to notice what happens to fulfillment when we put it back in progress. All right, so fulfillment snapped way back out to the right again. And that's because when you're in development, you don't get credit for the things you say you're going to do. You get credit for the things that you actually produce in the data trail. So what Deliver is telling us is that we're at minus 1.5 tickets per week for fulfillment. And as the project progresses and as the priorities for this team are reorganized, we should see an improvement here, and they should start to slide to the left. But this is something that we want to track to see if the decisions we made about priorities for this team are really having an impact. All right, so that went into taking an existing project with a bunch of data and going through a scenario where we think we're almost done, but leadership shows up, has some new news. We go to the teams, do some replanning, and get some new dates and some new commitments from leadership and from the teams to what the new plan looks like. The last thing I'll show you here is Deliver actually does do this tracking. So if we add an epic to the source structure, Deliver is going to show us that the expectation has been met. So I'm just going to quickly go over to this source structure and add that epic for fulfillment. And we'll just see how Deliver handles that. So you can see that now Deliver is not expecting any additional epics from this team. And the predicted stories have stayed the same because it's just moved from an expectation to an actual. Deliver is still including it in its predictions. If it happened that fulfillment added another epic, Deliver would then start to show you that we're actually acquiring too much scope. So we're over plan at this point. This is helpful when you're a delivery lead on a project and you've got lots of teams and they're all doing their agile process and grooming and creating stories. It's hard to necessarily keep track of every specific thing that's going on and whether or not they're over scoping in any specific area. So Deliver is going to help you sort of get an overview of how these teams are generating scope and whether or not they're sort of breaking the container that you set at the beginning. And you can go talk to the team about how they're doing and maybe get them to rescope to MVP. All right, so I'm going to switch to the, I'm sure there's a bunch of questions there.
Jeremy, just before you do, we actually do have a couple questions about this section of your demo. So maybe I'll just read those to you now.
Yep.
The first one is, could you describe for the audience how teams are being defined? Is it a custom field in an issue, or how are you defining teams?
Yep, great question. So if we look at the sidebar here, these are the control icons for Deliver. One of them is teams. So you can define a team in Deliver. Well, you give it a name. You can go find the board for the team, or if you've got some specific way of identifying this team, you can paste in or generate the JQL for this team. So for teams, what Deliver is really looking at is what is the source of priority for this team? How does this team decide what work is next, and what is the history of work for this team? So Deliver is not concerned about the constitution of the team in terms of people. What it's really looking for is how the organization thinks about priorities. And if an organization wants to get something done, what backlog does it put that priority in? And then how does that backlog perform against those priorities? So generally in Jira, that's a board for a team because that's where everybody looks to figure out what to do and how they're doing. But there could be some other way that you guys are doing it, in which case you'd probably just want to use some JQL for that. But Deliver works well if you use projects for teams, like each team gets its own project. It works well if you have a specific field for a team, you can key off that. Other situations, like maybe use a label or a component to define a team, Deliver is going to let you do that as well.
Okay. Another question, I think you've kind of danced around this, but you can probably elaborate a little bit. How are you defining, or how does Deliver define throughput? Is it based on story points or issue counts, or how is that? Yep. How is throughput defined?
Yeah, so Deliver looks at something we call rate to done. So there's a lot of ways to think about basically throughput for a team. But what Deliver is really doing is focusing on simulation. So the simulation for this line here on the CFD, which is to the left, this green line, is really how often tickets show up in the done column for a specific team. Whatever their process is, what sort of intervals does that produce in your done column? Is it several tickets a day? Is it a couple tickets a week? Deliver's looking at how often and these spaces and intervals between arrivals in done. So this lets us actually do a lot of things. Like, for example, it lets us understand what the priority focus is for a team. So if the intervals are very close together, we know that the team's probably focused on that project. If they're spaced further apart, we know that the team probably isn't focused on that priority. So the analogy that I sort of use is we look at the exhaust from a car. And when you've got your foot on the accelerator, that exhaust is really dense. And it tells us you're accelerating. And if you sort of take your foot off the gas, the exhaust starts to dissipate and space out. And that tells us that you're probably not focused on that. So looking at the different streams of priorities teams are working on, we can look at the density, relative densities between them and understand something about where their priority focus is. We can also then just sort of roll that up to a much easier number to talk about, which is like tickets per week, which is just an easy way to sort of communicate within the organization how these teams are doing against a backlog of tickets. If you have more questions on that, please ask again at the end. There's a lot to that question.
Jeremy, I'm going to read one more question here and then save some of the others for the end of the meeting. What if I have a customized hierarchy where I'm not using Epic Story, I'm using some other hierarchy of issues?
Yep. So for Deliver 1.0, Deliver uses the epic and only the epic for high-level scope. We do have in our immediate backlog an expansion of that to other kinds of tickets. There are people in our evaluation system now that have that very problem, and we're talking with them about how to solve it. But right now, Deliver works at the epic level with the epic issue type only.
Let's proceed. Thank you.
Yep. Actually, since we took a break staring at this, there is one little thing I want to add here, and that is that there are some other colors for bugs. And one thing Deliver does separate out is quality work from feature work. So you can look at your project and get some sense of when quality work is starting to show up in your backlog, when the teams are engaged with that quality work, and when that quality work is accruing in the done column. And you can get some sense of how the quality process is engaging with your project. You can see on the bottom here, there's a dark green section that is the accrued bugs in the done column. And you can see that they've really started to pick up about halfway through this project, which is fairly normal. All right, so let's switch to the second scenario, which is planning a project from scratch. So let me switch to the structure we're going to use for that. All right, so this is a scenario where leadership has come to us and said, okay, we've got a brand new portfolio level project. We want to develop some sort of electric vehicle MVP. How long is it going to take? So the first thing I do is identify all the teams that are going to be necessary for it, gather them together, and start going through the requirements for this project. And there are a lot of things they're going to know right away that they need to do. And those are the kinds of things I'm capturing at the beginning. And then there's a bunch of things that that they suspect they're going to need to do, or that they're going to need to do some learning on, but it's going to generate work in the future. And we're going to use Deliver to fill out the rest. So, you know, in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I've got, you know, a dozen epics from these teams, and that's pretty much all they really can commit to. But we've got the skeletal of a project here. We don't have any performance data. We don't have any stories. We've got nothing but the epic level for this. So let's go to Deliver and create our delivery for this project. You switch to the... We've got a target date, let's say, I don't know, some point out in the future. So with a delivery, you name it, you give it a target date, which generally comes from leadership, what they're trying to hit. We give it a source structure, which is our EC MVP. Training period. So this allows you to limit the history that Deliver looks at for a project, limit it to a certain number of weeks. So for example, let's say you've been on a project for 2 months, and you're reaching the end of the project, and you really only want to look at maybe the last 3 weeks of data because you want to increase the sensitivity to current events. So Deliver will let you do that, but right now we're just going to set it to unlimited, so it just gathers, well, there isn't any data, but it'll just gather in all the data as it comes in. The chart start date, this is really a cosmetic feature for reporting. Sometimes tickets are lying around in Jira for years before they get added to a project, and you just want to clip the start of a graph because you don't want to show the year that the ticket's been in the project. So you can just set the start date here to whatever cosmetic setting you want. Delivery lead, let's just add that. And then there's a grace period for the project, which by default is set to 20%. So what this means is that if you've got a target date, Deliver won't throw a red signal if you are 20% over the remaining time for the project. So for example, if you've got 10 weeks remaining in your project, Deliver's not going to throw a signal if you're 2 weeks over. But if you're 10 days from release date, it's going to be a 2-day window only. So the window narrows as you get closer to your target date. And this is because Deliver is statistical, it's not deterministic. So there's some variance in the predictions around a cone of predictability for that specific team. And because it's bouncing around, you don't want to throw a signal every time they're over a certain period. Or if you do, you can just remove the grace period, but we'll just leave it at the default. All right, so here's our project in the backlog. We're going to plan it. So we're going to move this over to planning. And here we have our EC vehicle MVP delivery with a little icon telling us it's not predictable because there's no data in it. So we're going to have to add some data to deliver to help it simulate this project. So let's go in and take a look. So here we have all the teams that are engaged with this project. It's got little red icons telling us that we need to get some planning data for these teams. And it's already telling us what it thinks the ending scope for this project is going to be, given the epics that we have defined in the source structure. And you'll notice that it's a different number of epics per team because they each have different numbers of epics in the source structure, but also because Deliver is predicting different numbers of stories based on how these teams have historically broken work down. So let's go in and plan this project and fill in the missing data. So because there's no performance data in this project, Deliver doesn't have any throughput for this team. But it does read the throughput for this team from the team's backlog and give us a historical throughput number. So across all priorities, the Android team generally gets about 7 issues done per week, which is just a baseline for us to work with when talking to this team. Now, they might say on this project, we can give you 3 tickets per week because we have a couple other priorities we're working on. They might also say that, yep, you have that epic that we gave you, but we're going to probably generate 2 additional epics for this project at some point in the future. We don't know what they are yet. They're going to be in collaboration with some other team, and we'll define them when we get to them. So we can add those here as an expectation and save this off. And now Deliver will give us the predicted slope for Android. It'll also tell us that we're expecting to see 2 epics from them and that we expect them to hit about 3 tickets a week for this project in order to hit this date. We go to billing and they give us a similar story. They expect another epic. I'll go over to this icon here. So this is the predicted number of stories per epic for billing. But billing might say, well, you know, we want to influence that as well. We want to influence it up or down because we expect either more quality work or maybe because we've done this so many times that we basically know we're only going to see about 12 issues per epic. So keep in mind that Deliver is not only predicting the feature work that the teams are going to generate in terms of how they break it down, but also the quality work that epics generate as they get to done. So this is these story counts are including how they think about feature work, but also the bugs and issues that come up that get attached to that epic. And when the epic's done, Deliver looks at all of that and figures out a profile for the team. So this is not just features, this does include bugs. So we can save that off for billing. And I'm just going to go through and add a few more for each of these teams. And then finally, iOS. All right, let me close all these down. All right, so here we have on the left our predictive CFD, which right now it starts today. So everything in this CFD is predicted. This is 100% predicted CFD. If we look to the right, we have story counts per team based on the epics that we have defined in structure, plus the epics that they expect to make at some point in the future, breaking down their story counts per epic and the quality work that likely is to be generated by this team before the epic makes it to done. So we've got about 284 stories in total for this project that we expect to be working against, which gives us a nice flat line at the top of this graph for this project. And then each team is shown to finish at a certain date based on the combination of work that they have for this project and the throughput that they can give this project. We can then go to leadership and say, well, it doesn't look like we're going to hit our target date, given what we're talking about with the teams. And they know very early, potentially the next day, what the situation is. And now we can make some decisions about priorities, about resourcing these teams, or about switching the target date. But the point is to get a commitment very early and make those adjustments very early so that we're working against a realistic plan that we can actually achieve. If we switch this particular plan into in development, we're going to see that everything goes red again because these teams need to actually generate some data for this project. And as soon as they do, Deliver will start to show the metrics and whether or not they're achieving the expectations that we set. But right now there's no data, so we won't see anything in the execution mode. One sort of, I guess, pattern for Deliver is to kind of leave the project in planning mode, maybe for the first 10 to 20% of the project, because there's a lot of learning that goes on and some adjustments you make. And then once you have some historical data and you see how you're tracking and it looks like you're going to hit your targets, switch it into in development mode and then track it from there. All right, so I'm going to switch to the portfolio setup that we used for this particular, for these demos, unless Dave wants to stop here with a question.
No, I think the rest of the questions will be appropriate for the end.
Yep. All right, so let me just quickly show how I've set up basically a portfolio solution using Deliver and Structure together. And this is a very simple, basically free way of doing it. So if we go to projects, what I've done is set up a specific project to, a specific project to hold a new issue type that I've created called a delivery. And this project only accepts issues of type delivery. And deliveries are the portfolio level items the organization is trying to get done. So now we can create a list of deliveries in a specific project that only accepts that ticket type. And we can workflow them through a workflow that the organization designs. So for example, you might have a backlog and then an RFP phase, and then an approval phase, and then a ready for development phase, in development, in review, done, so whatever. You can have some sort of extended workflow for these tickets that matches the portfolio workflow that you have in your organization. So once you have that ticket type, you create a delivery. So for example, delivery 30, and that really becomes the short name for the project in the organization. And the teams know that if they have work for delivery 30, that they link their work directly to that delivery. And what this does is farm out to the teams all of that tedious work of linking work to the delivery. So one person doesn't have to run around and make sure everything is in place. The teams themselves know where to put the work, and the work just sort of organically accrues against this ticket. And then you can feed it into Structure and pull all that work together, which is the next thing that we do. So once you've got this portfolio and you understand that, and the teams know that this is where you go to see the portfolio level work you're doing and to link their epics to the specific delivery that that epic belongs to, we can go create a structure that's automation is very simple. So these portfolio level structures are super simple. All they do is key off of that one issue type and pull in all epics and then extend the epics into their sub items. And you've got all of the scope that you need to get done for that particular portfolio item. Then you can take this and feed it to Deliver, and what Deliver will do is fill in the gaps. So for example, when I say we have all the work in here, we have all the work we know about and is defined. Deliver is going to tell you something about the work that you are probably going to define in the future and fill in the rest. And then you can work this specific structure towards that expectation and learn as early as possible if those expectations aren't being met, and replan quickly using Deliver's simulation tools. So that's the system we set up here. Very simple system, but it ends up being very powerful because you have the sort of native Jira solution as using a project and a ticket type that can be communicated very simply within your organization to just link the work to the specific project that it's for. You have Structure as a very powerful aggregator for that data, and you can add all of the columns and do the analysis and Structure that you want. You can add Gantt here to do the dependency planning across that work, and then you can feed this to Deliver and get your bottom line trending dates and simulated replanning tools and so forth. So we think we have the beginnings really of a very powerful approach to doing this portfolio level work. All right, so with that, I'm going to switch back to the presentation and just finish up. And then we'll get to Q&A. So the deliver way that we have here is really set big goals. Big goals have been kind of hard in organizations that are doing Agile because there's this tension. Deliver's there to really just alleviate that tension. Let the teams be Agile, let leadership make big plans, and then work together to achieve them. Deliver's focused on just get started right away. Don't do a lot of planning up front. Let the teams be Agile, define what they know, get started, and then let Deliver fill in the rest, and then track whether or not you're moving towards the expectations that you've set. Trust the teams. So really, the goal of agility is what's called self-governing teams. They're accountable to the work. They're responsible for doing that work. They're responsible for their own improvement. Let them focus on that. Just measure the effects of how they think about work and how their Agile process is going, and map it to the expectations that the organization is trying to achieve, and then manage that relationship. But verify with metrics. So Deliver provides some metrics to understand where the team's priorities are, how the teams think about work, what dates they're likely to be able to hit. But it also allows them to make modifications to that and take accountability for those modifications. But the objective data is important to sort of validate the stories that teams have about their own performance. And let the teams learn and adapt, and let the organization learn and adapt. Don't do your learning at the end based on pain. Do your learning early based on signals, and make the adjustments, make the pivots necessary while there's still time to replan, and while there's still time to deploy help and have it have an effect. And that brings us to the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. We have a number of questions. Some of them are very similar, so I'm going to do my best to consolidate everyone. Just a reminder, there will be a recording available since several people asked. That'll be posted to our YouTube channel, and we'll also send an email to anyone who registered for today's event to let them know that the recording is available. So let me do my best here to aggregate. And if we don't answer your question well, on the next slide, you can put that up now, Jeremy. You can reach out to us if you have any questions at all via deliver@almworks.com. Jeremy, the first question I'm going to ask is about the percentage of completed work. If an epic has a percentage that is completed, of the percentage of the assigned stories are completed, whether you're using story points or number of hours entered in the work log, does Deliver recognize that partially completed work?
Yeah, so, well, there's kind of, I think there's two questions there about the partially completed work. Deliver gives credit for a partially groomed epic. So an epic that has some stories in it, but that the team hasn't indicated that it's fully groomed that story, Deliver is going to treat it differently than an epic that's just empty in the backlog. So Deliver is workflow aware, and it does pay attention to the epic as it works its way through the workflow. So you'll get different story counts based on where it is. The story points. So this is, yeah, very common question. I can say that Deliver is designed to not actually need to worry about story points. Story points are another way to estimate work. And Deliver already has a very low-level mechanism for estimating how much work a team is going to generate and how they're going to get that work done. So story points are just another way that the team thinks about work, and can certainly help them plan their iterations or at the team level. One of the problems with story points is they don't roll up well in organizations because they're not necessarily compatible between teams. So one team's 5 might be another team's 8. And so what we did with Deliver is looked at really more fundamental mechanics than story points. However, having said that, it's a super common question. And and it's in our backlog to look at, okay, if your story points are really meaningful and it's important to integrate t-shirt sizes or story points into your planning, we can have Deliver look at those numbers and do some sort of assessment of what they mean and augment its predictions based on those numbers. But it is a roadmap item. I will reiterate, we don't think it's absolutely necessary to have that because Deliver does have a mechanism for doing prediction, and it does actually include story point mechanics for the teams, but not explicitly. So I think the short answer is no, but we are likely to add it for a number of reasons.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. We have time for one more question. To those of you who asked questions that aren't going to be answered live, I promise we will follow up with you via email. So I'm going to choose for that reason an anonymous attendee who we can't follow up with. They're asking, how exactly is Deliver defining scope? Is it based on the number of stories per epic, or just say a little more about how scope is defined the way you've been describing it today?
Yep. So scope is whatever you define as deliverable work by an engineer. So whatever an engineer would pull into in progress, complete, and demo as part of their Agile process. So that's generally a story, sometimes a task, a feature. Deliver allows you to configure all that. So if you've got several different ticket types that indicate work that a engineer actually does, you configure Deliver to recognize those types. If you've got specific types that indicate quality work, like a bug, sometimes you have CapEx bugs and OpEx bugs, you can tell Deliver about both of those. So Deliver is configurable in that way. In terms of how it breaks the epic, how it does the prediction, it looks at the historical, how teams have historically broken epics down, how quality work has accrued against those epics for individual teams, because some teams generate more quality work than other teams, and comes up with an aggregate count per epic per team, and then allows the team to influence that, if they think that a specific project is going to produce a different number of tickets.
Great. All right, and with that, we're actually at the top of the hour. So let me take a moment to just thank everyone for attending today. We really appreciate it, and we hope you take a closer look at Deliver. You can find it on the Atlassian Marketplace. The link that you see here, almworks.com/deliver, is just a short link to the Deliver page on the Atlassian Marketplace. And as I said a moment ago, if you have any questions or you want to elaborate on anything that you might have tried to ask today, you can hit us up at deliver@almworks.com. Thank you, everyone, and have an awesome day. We hope to see you again in the future. Thanks.